Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Turning Point Live. So tonight we've got a very exciting show ahead of us. We've got London Assembly member David Curtin coming on. Oscar, how have you been? How are you doing today?
Not bad. Been at Sussex University, so I did a video the other day about how those restrictions have gone and how it's all affected our uni, which has been, I'd say, disastrous. But you know, we've got to carry on, and hopefully by Christmas, then we can have some level of freedom.
So, what's it been like with the lockdown at university? Do you think you've got sort of value for money, or have you been sold a bit of a lie?
Oh, it's been absolutely atrocious. It's been absolutely atrocious. It's been, I think, as I said on the video, for the Stop the Student rip-off, you have security and the police walking around the streets with flashlights, torches, looking into buildings. You have people being evicted, people being fined £10,000 because they're having gatherings. At the beginning of the year, I think, well, my university especially, but most universities were sort of promised that they would have some level of in-person teaching, because, I mean, online is great, it's fine, but especially for things like seminars and smaller groups, it just doesn't work. It just absolutely doesn't work. So we were sort of half promised that, and they've sort of tried a little bit. And on my university, they've tried a little bit. You have one, maybe seminar, 2 seminars a week at tops, you know, but not that many people go to it. It's not great. And you know, if it's talk about value for money, I mean, it's been awful, it's been atrocious. And it's almost like they wanted to stuff everyone in the accommodation to get all the money, and then sort of don't really care about the rest of it. That's what it sort of seems to me. Anyway, so no, I think it's been absolutely awful.
No, fair enough. I guess it's time to introduce our special guest. So tonight, as I mentioned before, we've got David Curtin, who's a London Assembly member, and he's the head of the Heritage Party. So if you bring David in, Oscar.
There we are.
Hi, David. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Thank you very much for coming on. So you've just founded the new Heritage Party. Could you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Of course. It's something I've actually been working on for a few months, but we just announced it in September. And the reason is I think we need a properly conservative party in this country, because Boris Johnson got elected on the basis that he was going to get Brexit done and level up. That sounded fantastic. I was mildly happy at that point. But it's become a very, very big disappointment, and has done so many things that I think are not conservative at all. So I wanted to set up a party that was specifically socially conservative, to fill that space in the political spectrum. And I think there's millions of people who want that. And so the Heritage Party is there. If you want to have a look at it, look at our manifesto. We stand for national sovereignty, traditional family values, freedom, liberty, free speech, and self-sufficiency in skills, and defending our heritage. All things that I think are proper conservative values and principles, but which don't have any party of the big three representing them.
Yeah, I'd say to our listeners that I've sort of been following David and the Heritage Party over the last, well, since they launched in September, and they do have some really, really good things, especially on things like culture, on things like family values, and things about how the families have been destroyed, and sort of different institutions have been sort of wiped up by Marxists and that type of thing. So I would recommend to all of our listeners to go on and research more on the Heritage Party. I think we should start on the topic of the day, which is COVID restrictions and lockdown, which, in my opinion, I mean, since the start, I've always said, since the first lockdown, I said it was going to be a disaster, it was stupid, doesn't affect huge amounts of people, which is just sort of shelter the vulnerable and sort of carry on with our lives. Wondering what you think about the government response, and maybe there was another way that we should have gone in this country, David.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that now we've got 6 or 7 months of data, real data, we know that it's no worse than a bad flu season. And yeah, it does affect some people, particularly older people with underlying health conditions, it does affect very seriously. But for the vast majority of people, they can defeat COVID or SARS-CoV-2 with their own immune system. 99.7% of people who get it get better. So there's no need for these draconian restrictions that have taken away our civil liberties, that have destroyed hundreds of thousands of businesses and have actually affected people's mental and physical health in a way that's worse than if the government had done nothing. So I think we just need to get back to normal, do what Sweden has done. They've not had a lockdown. They've said, look, be careful, use your common sense, but they haven't said to everyone, you have to wear masks, you have to social distance, you have to stay indoors, and businesses have to close. They haven't done any of that, and they're in a better position than we are. So I think we should have done what Sweden did at the beginning. Now we've got months of data. I think we certainly should. There's no reason why we need to continue with lockdowns. I mean, that's my opinion anyway, looking at the evidence.
No, definitely. And again, what have you seen? Because you've been attending some of these anti-lockdown demonstrations. You've also seen how the police have treated people. Do you think the police have been treating people fairly? Is there a double standard in British policing at different events? What's your take on the issue?
Yeah, I've been talking about the problem in policing for a long time. First of all, talking about politically correct policing, but now we've got selective two-tier policing, it seems. And I think everyone's seen the difference in how police have treated Black Lives Matter, Marxist demonstrations, for example, in the summer in June, when they were all going off in London after the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It was a very nasty event. But what happened in London was unreal. There was no reason for massive demonstrations there, but police were taking a knee before these Marxists and treating them very, very softly. You've seen the same with Extinction Rebellion, where they've gone out in February and also September, later on in the summer, and they've been treated with kid gloves. They've been allowed to occupy large numbers of roads, a big space in the centre of London for days and days in February, and nothing was really done about them. The police treated them with kid gloves. But then the freedom rallies, people who were demonstrating for their civil liberties, they've sent the riot police in to demonstrations which were absolutely peaceful. I was at all of the ones in Trafalgar Square. There was no one blocking the roads. Everyone was in Trafalgar Square. There was no trouble until the riot police went in. And I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't have seen it with my own eyes, particularly on the 19th and the 26th of September. And I spoke at the one on the 19th of September. And I actually said in my speech, I was shocked that the Metropolitan Police have turned against the people, peaceful protesters, and sending in riot police to break up a peaceful demonstration when they did the opposite for other demonstrations which may consider to be more on the side of the radical left side of the political spectrum. So we've got a problem now with two-tier selective policing, and I want to end it, and that's one of the reasons I'm standing to be London mayor. I want to get the police back on track and doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to keep us safe, and they're supposed to catch criminals, and real criminals, like murderers, rapists, burglars, thieves, fraudsters. Those are the people that they should be going after, not peaceful protesters who are exercising their fundamental right to gather, assemble, and protest against policies and political decisions they don't agree with.
So do you think this is a decision the police have taken to sort of enforce this way, or to treat people with a double standard, or do you think this decision has been made for them?
I think there's in the rank and file of the police officers, I think there is some disquiet among many of the officers I've heard. I've had some police officers write to me and they say, they're really disillusioned and upset about what's going on. But you have other officers who they're almost like automatons. They just follow orders and they don't think about it. But, obviously this has come from the top. So in one sense, the Metropolitan Police is controlled by Sadiq Khan and Cressida Dick. But on the other side, on the other hand, you've also got Boris Johnson and Priti Patel as the Home Secretary feeding into the police bodies, the governing bodies, and feeding down orders. So, you know, they obey the Mayor of London, they also obey the Home Office, but they're all working in lockstep together. They're all on the same page in wanting to lock the country down and end freedom of assembly, end the right for people to gather and protest. I mean, they're all on the same page there. So whether it's what I call the fake conservatives and, you know, and Labour, they're all acting together in this. So, you know, they're basically one big party as far as I am concerned.
Very interesting. I guess the next thing I ask you, so obviously in your time in the London Assembly, you've been working with Sadiq Khan. What would you say your professional opinion of him is?
I think he's a very, very bad mayor. And I think he's also rather smug. And I think when you ask him really direct, pertinent questions, he diverts and deflects, and he tries to turn the answer around and give an answer which tries to make you look silly. You know, so instead of answering a question, for example, on you know, why are these things happening at the freedom rallies in Trafalgar Square, he turned the answer around and said, well, as usual, you haven't given me all the facts, and we need to consider this. So he tries to put a little slur in his answers, but you know, that's just the way he answers questions. And you know, after 4.5 years, I've got very, very used to what he says. I can always like work out what he's going to say before he says it. I mean, that's what happens when you face off against someone, the same person for such a long time. So yeah, that's what he does. But you know, he's very, very bad at with his money. The money that's coming into City Hall, he's not responsible with that. But you know, everything he does is through this left-wing filter, you know, of equality, diversity, and inclusion. That agenda, I would call it. And those are words which, you know, if you take them on their own, they're good words. But when they're put into the political context, you have an agenda which actually is quite destructive to what is already been, what's been in the policies that would actually make London and the country work well. I mean, for example, the mayor is in charge of transport. You know, my idea of transport is getting people from A to B as quickly and smoothly as possible. But for the mayor, transport seems to be about the climate alarmism and equality and diversity, which is not the most important thing in terms of transport. Running the transport system, you have to make the trains and the buses run efficiently, for example. Same with policing. One of his latest pronouncements on policing is that he wants 40% of the police force to be BAME, Black, Asian and minority ethnic, which really doesn't matter at all. I mean, my point of view is you pick the best person for the job. Oh, I don't care if they're black or white, young or old, male or female, as long as they can be a good police officer and they're focused on cutting crime, I'll put them in the job and I'll promote them. But he seems to want to be recruiting and promoting people on the basis of the color of their skin. And I think that's totally wrong.
I'd agree with all of that, and I think the biggest thing which you sort of touched on with Sadiq Khan is his sort of policies on policing and life crime, especially in London. That's just gone through the roof, and he's more worried about sort of how he looks to the public and how woke he is, and the phrase that you and I use, which many people like, cultural Marxism, which basically is having this institution, having the police, and as you say, having 40% BAME police officers, but not actually gone to the root of the problem of the upscaling crime, especially knife crime in London. He's not actually done it, or as far as I can see, not produced any policies, be it policing, be it pro-family, be it anything that have actually given rise to more opportunities for people. So as sort of Mayor of London, and if you were to become Mayor of London, then sort of what things could we see in London that you could push?
Yeah, I mean, In terms of the policing, they've got to cut crime. So I think one of the worst things that Sadiq Khan did at the very beginning is he said that he was against stop and search. He wanted to cut stop and search on the basis that it was racist, when it's actually one of the best tools the police have to get knives and other violent weapons off the streets. I mean, he wanted that. Theresa May at the time also wanted to cut stop and search. So again, there you've got two people in different parties in power working together. But I would bring it back in areas where there are high crime and for groups where there is a high rate of criminal activity. And I don't think we should be politically correct about this. I mean, you got to just call it like it is. A lot of the knife crime, I'm going to say it, is black on black knife crime. It's young black boys or young men in particular getting into gangs, often because of family breakdown, because they don't have a father, they don't have a male role model. Even some of the ones that get into gangs themselves say, I didn't have a father, the social media became my father, the gang became my father. They get in and then they get into a life of criminality, and the level of violence you've got with some of the new people coming into London, particularly from former war zones where the level of brutality is absolutely shocking, in places like Somalia and Congo and so on. You even have some of the young people themselves saying there's new people coming in with a level of violence we've never seen before, but they get into this and then they, the sort of violence that occurs between young black boys and other young black boys, it's tragic and it's shocking. But the police have got to go and deal with that. They've got to catch these people, take their knives and get them off the streets. But on a longer term basis, you've got to restore families and communities. Without that, there will never ever be an end to it. And family has been systematically broken down and eroded and fought against for decades and decades and decades. This is part of cultural Marxism. And unless we speak up and name it for what it is, it will never ever end. So we need to get back to honouring families, building families, supporting families, and putting in place policies in Westminster as well as other places that support them. And we need to change our culture again back to a culture which actually honours families and honours fatherhood as well, because that is such an important key role, particularly for young boys who otherwise can easily get led astray when they don't have a good father or father figure in their lives.
So I agree with all of that. I think you're right on that. By the way, on the comments, get a lot of support. From commenters, people want Sadiq Khan out. People are saying that they want you from Mayor of London. So that's all fantastic stuff. That's all fantastic.
That's fantastic. Please do vote for me. Yeah, that's wonderful.
No, I think as well, it's one of those things where people, they're not touching on a lot of this, actually looking at some of the roots of the crime, as you mentioned, sort of a lack of a father in certain communities, or just the lack of support or the draws for people. And actually we can't sort of worry about being politically correct when dealing with crime and preventing crime, because ultimately lives are at stake. Since Sadiq Khan has been in power, over 100 teenagers have been murdered in London. And that's as a result of his PC policies. Again, some of the policies, they might not be particularly nice, or they might not be nice and fluffy, but if they're effective and they reduce crime and save lives, I don't understand what the opposition is to them. Obviously, if these policies didn't result in anything, they'll be, you wouldn't use them if there was no sort of correlation. But they found when you reduce stop and search, crime goes up, and when you increase stop and search, crime goes down. So is that something you'd be looking to implement again if you did become Mayor of London? Would you be looking to?
Absolutely, I would. Look, no one likes stop and search. It's not pleasant. It's not, no one wants it to happen to them, but it does reduce crime. And that's been shown time and time and time again. So I would want to increase stop and search. We need more officers on the front line out patrolling the streets rather than sitting behind a computer patrolling thoughts and words and tweets on the internet. And Sadiq Khan started a unit with 900 people to look at hate crime and patrol, sort of what people said on social media. Spend, I think, 1.7 million on that specific thing over 2 years. I mean, that's a waste of money, in my point. You need the police to be out there building relationships with the communities, yes, but also doing the stop and search and getting knife crime off the streets, being a presence, because where there's a police presence, people commit fewer crimes, particularly in those high crime areas. And you've got certain boroughs like Hackney, like Southwark and Lambeth, where there is more knife crime, more youth violence than other places. Those are the areas you need to target. Yes, sadly, some of those areas are places where there's a higher proportion of black and ethnic minority people. We can't be politically correct about this, though. You've got to put the police in those areas. You've got to do stop and search in those areas. You've got to get the knives off the street in those areas. You've got to build relationships in the long term with the communities in those areas so that they begin to trust the police again. The trouble with policing is it's all become reactive. And part of that is because of the decline in the numbers of the police over the last 10 years or so. As also combined with Sadiq Khan's policies of taking police off the street and putting them looking at stuff on the internet and so on. So we need to build that up again, so we do more community policing rather than just react and response, because then that's what you need to do in the long term to reduce crime, as well as the going in with force in the short term.
I agree. I think
definitely, and I think it's one of those. Oh, sorry.
Police was started to prevent crime rather than sort of react to crime. That's sort of the job of police. Police is to be community police officers and to actually prevent the thing going on rather than reacting to it. I want to touch slightly upon, which I agree with you with the whole sort of family thing and lack of father figures, which we talked before, I think is the biggest problem in really society, and it leads to poverty and education, people not aware of education, crime, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of people actually agree with that, and I'm one of them, but I sort of struggle to actually see where do we go from here? What sort of policies can we introduce? What can we do to sort of help the family unit and to get fathers sort of back on board and to sort of bring that unit closer together?
It's not really something the mayor could directly affect. I mean, you can affect it indirectly by being someone who supports families, and I would sort of completely oppose Sadiq Khan's pontifications on families where there's all families come in all different shapes and sizes and they're all equal. I reject that point of view. I think if you have married mother and father bringing up their own children, those children have, in general, better outcomes in every possible thing you can measure. Now, that's not to disparage anybody who is a single parent or who is in a different kind of family, because they do a great job. But you do have to realize that is proven. And that's what we need to try to support. But when you come back to Westminster and the laws that make there, particularly the tax system penalizes families if they stay together as married couples. I mean, I would increase the married couples allowance from 10% to 100%, so they don't lose any money through the tax system. It's crazy to have a tax system where you're better off if you split up than if you stay together. I mean, so we need to change the tax system to actually reward married families who stay together rather than punishing them. And that's just a very simple thing that you can do. I costed it for the election in 2019 when I was standing. I think it would cost £3.5 billion, something like that, to do that for the families that would be affected. I mean, that's just a third of our overseas aid budget, for example. So, let's spend the money on supporting families here rather than building wind farms in Argentina. I think that's a far more productive use of taxpayers' money, for example.
I understand what you're saying. I think there's very much a lack of incentive for people to stay together other than duty. And we're seeing that 'cause divorce rates are going up, single parenthood's going up. And again, it's not to disparage, as you said, single parents, because some of them do a great job. But actually, as you said, children, they respond better in families where they have two parents present. And particularly, again, with single parents, if they're working jobs and trying to nurture their kid as well, it can be tricky. Again, some people do it, but not everyone is sort of at that top level of sort of super parent, I would say. So it's looking at ways in which we can encourage that. And I think it comes down to education as well, like going into the schools and trying to explain sort of family values to people and what they should be aiming to do in life. Because at the moment, there's a big focus on everyone's got to get a top job and that's it. But again, not everyone can do that. There's no focus and say, actually, you can get a family, may be able to raise children, you may be able to do lots of sort of natural things, which will give you sort of enjoyment in another way and get you off this mindset of I've got to be the best at the top to get a job. You see that now where people are starting families later on in life, where they think I can't have children early on because it's going to ruin my career. And again, it's changing that mindset around children. That is not a burden, it's not a life ender, it's something which can actually improve your life. I'm not sure what's your sort of take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. And I think, education is a key thing. And actually trying to teach people that, families are good. This is the natural way of doing it. It always has been throughout all of our history. It's only suddenly in the last 20 or 30 years that this understanding that we've had through all the generations in our country in the West before us has suddenly started to be broken down. And you know what, I might get into trouble for saying this, but I think you have third and fourth wave feminism is a lot to do with this, and there's a lot of misandry in these later manifestations of feminism you have that says, women don't need a man, you could do it all. And then, but then you get to the situation where, a woman maybe has one child on their own, they never have a father figure around. And so that again is the consequence of these later manifestations of feminism, which are destructive to the family. I mean, they're very open about this. They say, they want to smash the patriarchy, that the patriarchy is the source and cause of all evil for women. I'm not against first wave feminism from the turn of the last century, where women got the vote, women got suffrage, and some of the second wave feminism is equal pay for equal work, equal inheritance rights, equal rights to education, to own a business, that kind of thing. That's all good. But this misandrous feminism that you've got today is very destructive. And I think, if you're a conservative, I think you need to speak out and say, this is not something that is a good thing. We need to actually support traditional family values rather than these third and fourth wave feminist ideologies that are coming out.
I think that the other thing that I'd say is sort of very important that you've spoken about, and sort of I've spoken about before as well, and you're sort of very big on, is this idea that our institutions have all sort of been slowly but surely over time been taken over by radical thinking. So it sort of started with the universities and 60s, 70s, 80s with that sort of movement, and I almost feel that sort of they don't really care about that much about economics. Like, they can live with a little bit of sort of free market economics, that's fine, as long as it's sort of woke capitalism. The big thing for them is sort of culture, and it's gone from the universities, it's gone from university to the schools, and then it's getting younger and younger and younger, and it's also come through our police, which we touched on as well. So I think that's sort of an indoctrination of people, and then you go onto the media and you turn on the media, and it's all one sort of point of view. I haven't seen any sort of mainstream media outlet talk about being anti-lockdown, for example. There's no sort of question to the Prime Minister being like, well, why didn't we do a Swedish model? I've never seen that.
No.
That's their job to question the Prime Minister on maybe other strategies. So yeah, there is this sort of culture, I feel, that inside sort of Westminster, sort of the so-called elite, where everyone has one point of view and everyone needs to push that point of view. And if you don't, then you're, racist, sexist, bigot, and you hate poor people and that type of thing. That's incredibly prevalent, as I find, and I've found at university.
Yeah. Oh, this is the long march through the institutions. I mean, this is well known. That's Rudi Dutschke's phrase from the New Left, radical student leftist in Germany, building on the sort of earlier cultural Marxists from the Frankfurt School and so on, where economic Marxism was translated into all kinds of conflicts and narratives being set up between different groups in society. So, for example, women are oppressed by men, black people are oppressed by white people, LGBTs are oppressed by cis-normative and heteronormative society and so on. And therefore, you need to completely undermine everything that's gone before and turn it on its head. And then, you know, people have got into the universities to try to undermine our traditional values and conservative values, and that's gone on to the media, it's gone into the political parties, all of the main parties. Now you see it even in businesses, where you at sports, where you have, you know, these sports players and football teams and rugby teams taking a knee for Black Lives Matter before every game, you know, because there's, you know, they are required almost to bow down to the cultural Marxist narratives. And, you know, Black Lives Matter, of course, as we know, the organization is very open about them wanting to smash capitalism, disrupt the nuclear family, and smash heteronormativity, and so on. All of these kind of things, which are Marxist in their origin. So this has gone through the institutions. But, you know, I think we've got to do two things. We've got to build our own new institutions and businesses and organizations which will be conservative, so that people have an alternative. But even if we're doing this, you've got people on the left trying to smash anything new coming in by deplatforming them, even by trying to get them kicked out of the financial system. You know, for example, I mean, Gab and this new social sort of Twitter alternative, you know, they've been deplatformed by, they can't get a bank account, they've been deplatformed by PayPal and so on. So it's very tough to try and do this. But the other thing we can do is try to get back into the old institutions, retake them over. You know, in a way, I think Trump has done that very, very successfully in the USA. I mean, he's got into the Republican Party and he's actually made it conservative again, which I think is a fantastic thing. Very, very difficult to do that. I don't know if that's possible in the UK, but, you know, I know people are having a go, but I see my role is more in setting up something as an alternative, and hopefully that will be successful, you know, in the wider movement to try to restore conservatism and conservative values to the United Kingdom.
Well, I think actually, David, we're out of time there, but thank you very much for coming on today. Time flies when you're having fun, but no, I think our audience really appreciated hearing you speak. I've seen lots of sort of positive comments on the side thread, which is great. And we'll definitely have to have you on again in future. So thank you very much for coming along today.
Fantastic, thank you.
Awesome. And everyone watching at home, so the shows, they're going to become a bit more consistent. So at the moment, some of you might be aware that I've been traveling around the US, getting interviews, sort of networking and boosting the profile of Turning Point UK. I'll be flying back shortly to the UK, and so we'll be hosting more regular broadcasts from the UK. There'll be a bit more sort of high tech, so thank you very much for bearing with us while we've been in sort of lo-fi mode as such. Thank you all for tuning in today, and we'll keep you updated about the next one. Oscar, is there anything you'd like to say before the broadcast ends?
Yeah, I'd say that firstly, thank you very much, David, for coming on, and I'd also sort of recommend all of our sort of listeners and people listening to actually follow David and what he's doing with the Heritage Party, because he's doing some fantastic stuff, and he's really, especially on Twitter, I follow on Twitter, he does some really interesting stuff, so go follow him on Twitter, go have a look at the Heritage Party. I think they're doing great stuff. One of the only parties I'd say that are actually standing up for sort of British values and social conservatism, so definitely have a look at that. And yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you to the people that have commented. I think there's a lot of people that are quite David supporters in the comments, which is fantastic to see, as always. And and if you do support David, if you enjoyed the broadcast today, please share it to your friends and get it going. So we're going to leave it up on all of our platforms, and so please retweet it, share it, send the link on YouTube, and then more people can see David, they can see our point of view, and hopefully tune in for future shows. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in tonight.